Hey, Rod, what's
What's going
happening?
on? I want to talk about pea and hemp protein.
Okay. Pee, like actual urine?
PEA,
Oh,
peas,
got
pea
it.
protein.
Got it.
hmm
I was very nonchalant about the idea of it being urine. I guess I've come to accept anything in this part of
I
the
don't know
show.
that urine has a high nutritional value.
No, probably not.
It is sterile. That's why the
Yeah,
astronauts can drink theirs, like, what is it, 7 times or something like that?
I don't know. But what was that? But pee and what?
Pea and hemp protein. The one I use is called Sunwear. There's a whole bunch,
Mm.
but just kind of looking for more sustainable protein sources.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I don't really like the whey proteins
Mm.
because of the dairy, like the casein or casein. I don't really know how you say it, but
I think it's casein, yeah.
it's a dairy based protein, and I don't have I have like a dairy sensitivity, I think, not an
Mm-hmm.
allergy.
So do
So I'll
I.
like break out. I'll get
Yeah.
like and
Yeah.
then sometimes my stomach will not love me for that.
Yeah.
But the pea and hemp tastes good,
Mm.
and I have pretty good results from it. I like it.
PEA. It's
Speaking
important.
of speaking of PEE though, if sometimes pea protein can cause a buildup of uric acid, which would be a
Mm.
bad thing for the pea and for that for
when
some
when you
people.
when you need PFAX.
You come here, PEA, PEE. Let's go.
This is the More in Common podcast. Welcome. This is a place where we explore the fact that we have more in common than that which divides us by anchoring humanity in compassionate conversation. I'm Rocky Voria, and I'm an avid listener of this podcast. I was also a guest in Season 1, Episode 29, titled Be Yourself and Believe in Yourself, and I'm happy to be introducing today's show. What I love about this podcast is that it showcases people who come from so many different walks of life. We get to hear stories from actors, artists, people in business. We get their perspectives on racial tensions, social inequalities, and other difficult topics, giving us each an opportunity to listen, learn, evaluate, reflect, and ultimately evolve. Now, remember, you can find all things More in Common at moreincommonpod.com. Their episodes, merchandise, blogs, and definitely, if you like what you hear, give them a listen in your favorite podcast app and leave a review. We'll try to read it on a future show. And finally, be sure to share, share, share. Again, I'm delighted to introduce today's episode. The More in Common podcast hosts have dubbed 2020 a decade possible, and this is Season 2, Discovery. Today's episode is with Rob Reynolds. Rob is an acclaimed artist with works in museums around the world. He's a sculptor, painter, mixed media, and installation artist. He has acclaimed works at Bert Green Fine Art, Pergamon Museum in Berlin, the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, and many more. One of my favorite Rob Reynolds installations was called An Ocean View for Denver, since I'm from Colorado. But Rob was born in Newton, Massachusetts, and currently has his studio in LA, California. He has great perspective on many topics and provides insights and perspectives that make for a fun and insightful conversation. This conversation actually took place back in August 2019, but we're thrilled to finally bring it to your ears. During the conversation, you'll hear Rob's perspective on what being an artist is, including how he got his start and the role his parents played. What it was like for Rob to grow up west of Boston in the 1970s, the classism, racism, and homophobia that existed. You'll hear his thoughts on the liberal fantasy, and also how he tries to use art to make an impact. He shares some interesting comments on how the current election has impacted his work, talks about his focus on climate change, community, and managing optimism. They cover a lot with Rob in a short amount of time, but I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show with Rob.
So before we get into this episode, I got to tell you a little bit of something that Rodney got me into about 7 months ago. One of those things, like he talks about these things all the time, and I hardly ever try them. But this one in
Super true.
particular, Audible. Audible for audiobook listening. Like I tell you, I love reading books. I don't have a lot of time. I got 2 kids, 2 jobs. I got a relationship that I try to invest in. But I really like to read books, and there's a lot of information out there that helps us learn for our business, learn for podcasting, learn for all of the things, or just pleasure in reading. And it gives me that space to listen. So Rodney, thank you for putting me onto them, because I'm excited to put other people onto it too.
Yo, man, glad I could help. I love it. I've been doing it for years. I highly recommend it.
And I know you do it for driving and
I do it for driving in LA. And honestly, you get to get one book for free. You can send a book to a friend for free. You can return any book if you don't like it. I mean, that's lovely. And they got a trial period going on. You get a free membership to start. So we're gonna put a link on our website. Go check it out. It's an affiliate link. We do get a little bit on the back end, so you're supporting us. We would really appreciate it. Go to our website, moreincommonpod.com. Check it out.
Check it out. Audible.
Something that I feel, which is I think that people do have what one of my favorite teachers of all time, Robert Cole, said, a call to service in us. And I think if you don't do a little bit, at least a little bit for people for no remuneration, you can't get paid for it, can't get action from it, it's not, your career is not going to be boosted by it. But if you don't do a little bit of something, at least, then you don't feel right in the world. And dive in head first, and accepted that one could actually do what one wanted with one's life. It's basically all I ever wanted to do.
All right, we're back. We're here with Rob Reynolds. Rob, how are you, sir?
I am well. I'm happy to see you both.
Thank you for joining us.
Happy to see you.
Thank you for coming over.
Yeah, love your studio. We're in his studio right now, which is
downtown LA.
Impossible to describe the feeling you have when you're in here of peace.
It is very peaceful.
It's very calming.
Serene.
I feel like I'm on, what was that SNL skit, or the SNL skit from back in the 90s, the Sweaty Balls, with...
Sweaty Balls.
Like, it's a mock of NPR, and they talk
where they're like
the whole time. And
very...
Welcome to my studio. It's fantastic to see you here. The cadences of intellect.
That's right.
Enlightenment. Welcome to my bubble. Now, when you come to your bubble.
So, Rob, I think to kick this off, it would be really easy to call you an artist. I mean, you make art, but how do you describe or define yourself?
I simply say I'm an artist.
Yep.
I'm comfortable with it. I'm fine with it. There were moments in my life in which I was uneasy about it for whatever reason.
Did you figure out do you know why?
Look, there are certain, I suppose, pitfalls or cultural overdeterminations and cliches that I was wary of. But, we have lots and lots of good examples of artists that have lived exemplary lives. And I'm fortunate to have grown up with lots of great examples and with artists who simply show good ways of being in the world. And I think now art practices can include lots of different types of activities. And so when I say I'm an artist, I don't necessarily, intend to be an artist in the way that Bob Ross perhaps was an artist.
Good old Bob Ross. He's made a real strong
kind
comeback.
man as he was, a calming man as he was. But now art is in an unsiloed world. It can include lots of different things. It can be a very inclusive process and practice, and it can include the social and the world as it is, and lots of different kinds of things. And I think if you unsilo some of the traditional distinctions, it can be a pretty interesting way of being in the world.
So kind of not wanting to be pigeonholed. When you were thinking about some of the negative,
those cultural overdeterminations.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it just depends on how you define your practice. And for me, painting takes the most time, and so it forms the de facto center of my practice. The paintings take a long time to make for me. I care about them very much. A lot of thought goes into them, and a lot of traditional types of artisanal labor. But I would also say that research and being in the world and reading and meeting people and attacking issues and thinking about how we can make the world more interesting and a better place is sort of part of stuff that I'm thinking about these days. I mean, I guess if there's one issue at the core of what I do that kind of is a common ground, it sort of is about making the unseen visible in one way or another.
Now, you said before we sat down, is that the last 3 years are a particularly interesting time for artists. What do you mean by that?
I feel that the election of the current president,
President Donald Trump. I'm just because there's no time
Current
stamp.
events.
Yeah.
Current events. If this is being aired 10 years from now, hopefully he's still not the president.
He's Supreme Czar at that point.
Should we be so blessed?
Podcast over.
Well done, foreshadowing a possible
That's
bad
a great
outcome.
way
That there should be a new executive in the executive branch, and in 10 years post-haste, people will listen to this. Yes. Well, look, it turned a lot of assumptions that I had about the world on their head, and was, I feel sort of eager to be awake in the world in a different way, and to not wait for the government to do all kinds of things that I used to think that it would do. And also to sort of lean in with the art that I make and try to intentionally dedicate some of my time and energy to things that I care about.
And I feel where you want to go because of that.
Yeah. But
I want to ask, before we get into...
I'll flag it.
What got you into art? Have you always been an artist?
Asthma. And,
God.
Did not see it. Talk about foreshadowing. That did not occur there.
Look, little wheezy kids outside of Boston have to find stuff to do. And, you have to kind of sit and get into a meditative state to catch your breath and cope with all the medicine and all the different kinds of things. And drawing and painting and building things was definitely sort of my refuge and what was interesting to me. And I suppose I have an aptitude for it, and it was sort of what I liked.
Sure.
And once I was sort of allowed myself to dive in head first and accepted that one could actually do what one wanted with one's life, it's basically all I ever wanted to do.
How long
Did that take... We've known each other for 17 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
A lot of times.
Not even
finish each other's
It's not
sentences.
even
It's a beautiful
finishing.
friendship.
It's not even finishing. It's the same sentence.
And it's funny when you think about podcasting, like a lot of people don't say, well, a lot of people say I've never been interviewed by two people. And generally we find
It's
a way to
basically
make
one
it
person.
work because, of that very reason. So I'll give you the honors.
Did it take a long time to come to that? One can be what one wishes?
And allowing yourself to be an artist.
Yes, it did. And for whatever reason, not because of my parents, who were really wonderful and full of ideas and immensely creative. My mother's a painter. My father
So they were
is a
supportive.
polymath. They were supportive of whatever I wanted to do. I was very, very lucky. But they had lots of
A
interesting books
polymath?
around. He's sort of has lots of different talents.
Oh, Renaissance man.
He's like that.
I'm going to start calling myself a polymath.
So it's going to sound a little pretentious, but I say go with it.
I have no problem with sounding pretentious and or bougie.
Not only was he a polymath, he was an autodidact.
Wait.
Self-taught. So, and a lot of stuff.
Wait.
But
I've heard of autodidact. I can't place it right now.
He could fix a car and build a house and, repair a stereo and sweat a pipe and be funny and talk to you about the way the universe worked and all kinds of stuff, and he still does. But anyway, just being around parents that were immensely creative was very helpful, and I wanted to be a doctor, and then I sort of collided head on with my lack of aptitude for that. And
what made you want to be it if you didn't have an aptitude for it?
I think I just maybe being a sick kid, I just wanted to help people feel better or something about that. But and I look, I still look upon that noble life's work with envy, truthfully, and I sort of am always trying to figure out ways that we might make our art do good work as well. And I believe that it's possible sometimes and not possible other times. But there's a little bit of that in what I think about.
What was it like growing up outside of Boston? And I'm assuming you grew up in the 80s?
I'm older than I look. I would say I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I was very aware of what life was like in our comfortable suburban setting outside of Boston. But I was very aware of the Vietnam War. I was aware of busing. I was aware of certainly somewhat vaguely aware of class distinctions. When stuff like the Chelsea fires would happen and you'd suddenly see things exposed in ways, mostly from the relentless presence of morning television and my grandparents and whatever. But what was it like? It was privileged. It was colder. It was relatively privileged where I lived, but I think it was pretty gnarly and pretty intense for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Boston has an interesting history, especially around race and Irish. I mean, a lot of stuff around race, right? Like Irish, blacks, like all kinds of things. Does any of that play into some of the stuff we'll get into later, what you focus on with your art and the things you're interested in? Like, does any of it go back to that, or?
I was very lucky to have great teachers who were very in tune with stuff that was going on in Boston around busing, for instance, around, it wasn't called social justice in my experience back then, in the kind of pedagogical whatever environment or ecosystem. But my teachers were pretty dialed in to what was going on, and we talked about current events. I was very lucky to go to a public school with a kind of pilot program or an experimental program where teaching was experiential and based on real stuff that was actually going on. And
how common was that education at that time?
I don't think it was that common in public schools. I don't know. We had a pretty good little bubble going where I was west of Boston, but the people were very open about the essentially segregated nature of the city, and people were pretty open about race and probably also class-based antagonisms based on different types of life experiences. I mean, I think
when you say open, you mean like it was discussed,
aware of it,
aware of it, and or just radiating symptoms of it. Use of strong language and awareness of racial bias. Some people doing stuff about it, some people not. But I mean, I think at the time, the liberal and progressive democratic push in the state legislature was pretty powerful, and it was a bitter pill, but it was a pill that everyone had to swallow and kind of deal with. But I mean, the daily sort of agony and pain that people were feeling, and around definitely busing and people in South Boston being very vocal about it. And I just sort of think about what the kids must have endured.
Mm-hmm.
You know, imagine jumping on a bus in Dorchester and ending up in Wellesley at a high school and walking in. And, you know, even the most liberal and enlightened kids probably were forced to reckon with it. I think it was a really very powerful
They were probably
moment.
hit with bias pretty hard,
Were
right smack in the face.
Being that you were west of Boston, did your school have any exposure to busing?
No. No, I think it's quite possible it was just a little bit too far.
Mm-hmm.
It was 17 miles as the crow flies.
Okay.
Due west on Route 2. And one of the things that the sort of the liberal fantasy in which we lived was informed a little bit by New England transcendentalism, like think Emerson and Thoreau and abolitionist rhetoric, and you know, a certain piety around that and a certain pride around it. And I'm certain that we all could have done more. And I'm certain that there was a lot of stuff that was sort of left unquestioned. I mean, the sort of the uglier and more obvious kinds of displays of anxiety over difference was more around homophobia in the 80s. I mean, it was just like crazy how extreme that was.
Especially
and
with AIDS.
how common it was, how common as a kind of, you know, like just like reflexive kind of use. And I mean, one of the blessings of this moment, I think, is that we have a lot more awareness and a lot better tools to kind of be thinking about it and be conversing. Like
What do you liberal fantasy, like going into that just a little bit more? What do you mean by that?
I think that there was a sense of, we've kind of dealt with most of these issues, and
which
we can
is
kind of move on.
very Bostonian in general. That idea is like, we fixed that.
Right.
We're good.
You might have felt it in New Hampshire as well. I mean, I think, a teacher of mine who I learned a tremendous deal from referred to Boston as a ladder, and everyone's climbing it. And a lot of people are falling off of it, but that kind of hierarchical thing about it, which may come from the English caste system that people were famously escaping.
Air quotes.
Escaping.
For those of you in the viewing audience, those were scare quotes.
In our live production here.
The man has walked off the left side of the stage.
No, but look, it's a heavy thing, and I think that there was a lot more to talk about than we talked about. And I think now, certainly with Trump being on this wild rampage, and you know, I guess the common term now is dog whistling.
What does that mean? Do either of you know? Because I'm not real sure.
It's just, I mean, if I were to explain it, it's just the concept of, you know, blowing a whistle to get dogs riled up. Like everybody get them riled up. So you blow that silent whistle that people can't hear, that dogs hear, and they start just barking.
Okay.
It's a very condescending kind of term, right?
Yeah,
because
totally.
in it, right, it's about a whistle that plays to the frequency of an animal that can only hear that frequency, and they're getting wild from it.
It's a very eloquent way to say it, yeah.
But just the same, that people that have been feeling repressed or have not been openly expressing racist or classist or whatever kinds of feelings through acts of hate somehow feel like they can talk about it, and or they can act out on this stuff. And
Trevor Noah said a couple nights ago, he's like, man, it's white people get really uncomfortable when black people talk about racism. God, he said it so much funnier. It was like,
that wasn't very funny at all.
No, it wasn't funny. He was like, He's like, oh my God. Oh, he's like, white people call black people racist when they talk about racism that they've been experiencing their whole life. And it was in the context of another joke. That's why it was funny. But
well, a little bit of humor to let in the dough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or to let a little air in, because there's so much anxiety around it. There's so much anxiety and there's so much pain around it, and fear of offending people, fear of not knowing the right position, or having an unformed position, or fear of the darkness of one's feelings. And it's very, very it's heavy, and it's a real thing.
Now, does this go to, you mentioned it turned a lot of your assumptions on their head, the election of Donald Trump. What assumptions? And does this tie into that?
That we somehow we're better than Charlottesville.
Mm.
That we moved past that.
Mm-hmm.
That
as a nation,
as a people,
that we would not allow that,
or that it wasn't in our spirit.
Yeah, at all.
Not that. Look, that it was a latent impulse, but that our better natures were going to get the best. We're going to propel us forward. That we had made an incremental gain. That it was a shocking wake-up call. I mean, the joke was the bubble, right? And a lot of white liberal assumptions were lampooned very eloquently and in a very funny way by those SNL skits. Like Brooklynites bragging about the news feed from HuffPo. Thinking about their cortado and their 4 African-American friends here in the bubble.
That's right.
I invited Terrell over yesterday.
11211.
Well, that kind of goes to the essence of Boston in general, or the North. When you think about the history of the North, in relative terms, a lot of people still consider the South the racist part of the country because they supported and fought for slavery in the Civil War. Yet, the North, you talk about busing, at that time, the North fought it and actually had more segregated schools because of the geography of the space. Like, you had regional schools in the South, so busing actually had an impact, whereas you had local schools in the North, so that was based on the neighborhood that you lived in. So, and there were some judicial judgments that allowed for this area not to have to bus in this area only because of the way they moved. And segregation is just as big in the North. It's just, it's not Jim Crow.
Right.
That's why I wanted to go into the liberal fantasy.
Right.
Yeah.
John Oliver has a really good piece on segregation, and I think he uses New York, talking about everything you just said. And it's like that fantasy. It's like, no, like, we don't believe that. Like, we don't want slaves. We don't think that, so we're good.
Yeah.
Like, so everything else is okay, or we're set.
And it's like a lot of there was I think it was the Daily Show. They did one of their field pieces, and they were in Boston asking Bostonians if they think Boston is racist, when it is considered one of the more racially divided places in the country, especially in the 80s and the 90s, during the Celtics versus Lakers, just from a sports representation, like the division around white Larry Bird versus black Magic Johnson.
Right,
I mean, and it was vitriolic, right?
We had Parrish too.
We did, but he was the okay guy, right? He was one of the
that's the
good ones.
sociological thing where it's like
we have our guy.
He's okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, it was very obvious to any halfway compassionate human being that Jim Rice was not treated well in the outfield.
Yeah.
And that Oil Can Boyd was not treated very well in a tough town.
Yeah.
It's no secret that there are radical class divisions And I mean, we could invoke the term intersectionality here. We could kind of try to untangle a lot of the distinctions, but the power dynamics are very heavy there. And yet there is also a liberal tradition of trying to seek and find our better selves. But there's also a moment of reckoning. I mean, I had the good fortune of going to Brown University in the 80s, late 80s, graduated in 90 and a half or something. And even then, the Brown family's relationship to the Dutch East India Trading Company and slave trading was kind of murmured about.
I didn't realize that.
I didn't know that
It was
either.
murmured about. It was not talked about.
What I did think about was if somebody tuned in right before you said that, the Brown families. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Brown.
You know, we're talking about John and Moses of the Providence Plantation. One, a Quaker who had distaste for his brother's proclivities for trafficking in human beings, and the other, you know, a merchant who's buying and selling stuff and great at it. And
Stuff
the
like
rumor
tea
was
and
the rumor was that there was
people.
a
The other.
yeah, it's heavy, it's awful. The rumor was that there was a tunnel connecting the Brown mansion down to the waterfront, so that after it became unfashionable, though before the Emancipation Proclamation, they could still have slaves working in the household. But look, the university's been doing the hard work of reckoning with it, and they, you know, and this is where art might begin to come into the conversation. They commissioned Martin Puryear to do a sculpture on the green, on the hallowed green, of a giant chain into a submerged, you know, ball underneath the ground. And there's a lot of teaching, a lot of reckoning, and I think a lot of good work being done around it. And you know, it's no secret now that a lot of New England merchants and bankers profited very directly from slavery and from different types of businesses that were very morally suspect. You know, the Opium Wars, for instance. And one of the projects that I did is around kind of unseen or lesser known maritime catastrophes and disasters. Like there was a company that was financed in Boston that financed essentially an opium cutter to be built in Baltimore outside of the puritanical gaze. Frederick Douglass may have worked on it. It was built in the shipyard where he had his first job as a free person. And then it went and applied the waters between, I guess, Rangoon and Burma and China, and generated massive amounts of profit for bankers back in Boston. And it was a sort of unseen business practice. It didn't have the same moral tenor as the Sackler family is getting now around the opiate disaster. But it's frowned upon. But there are these hypocrisies that are kind of braided into the culture. And
I mean, that's
it's
at
part
the
of
core of this country.
Yeah,
Like ill-gotten gains.
ill-gotten gains.
Where do you see, you said, you know, Howard, where do you see your art kind of coming back to the reckoning of the last 3 years and really trying to change your assumptions, helping move and advance in a positive way? Like that visualization that you just painted about that, I mean, is it beyond that, just creating visualizations, or like how do you play that in and intertwine it?
Well, you know, look, making paintings is not ladling soup for the hungry.
No.
Making paintings is not building shelters for the homeless. And we have 300 people living in this neighborhood now on the street, in a 4-block radius.
In this neighborhood.
This neighborhood. Making paintings is not, you know, creating jobs for the unemployed. I think paintings can talk about, I think, historical events, historical material in a way. Paintings can also be frivolous and beautiful. I mean, think about a saxophone solo. You know, there's a certain frivolity to it, a certain beauty to it. Certainly it has its histories. I think that there's a really important place that art takes in for our souls, for our culture. But I also want my work to do more. And really, I'm it's not compelled by liberal guilt or whatever, but I feel compelled to allocate a bunch of my time to try to participate in different types of activities that I feel are helping people. So I'm working with a friend and some friends on a homeless campaign called Everyone. It's by the United Way, and just doing some graphic work for them and stuff like that. And that's something that I've felt very compelled to do starting 2 years ago for whatever reason. Because I don't think we can wait for the government. It's not going to save us. And we're a city where we have 56,000 people on the street. Where to begin? That's the question. And I think maybe if we all just do a little bit of whatever we can to help. I mean, I'm interested in air quality, and I have a concept that I'm working on with some activist organizations to try to bring awareness about air quality. I mean, think about something that's at once universal, it's everywhere and it's nowhere. But those that live in South LA, in the corridor between downtown LA and Wilmington and the port, suffer the most because of traffic, because of trucks. Trucks generate 40% of our emissions. And there are 100 days a year when you can't breathe the air here, and the people that live underneath the 710 and the 605 and the 105 and all those, roads that we are satirizing the Californians.
Yeah, the Californians. The Californians.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like, I think that art can participate in these broader conversations, and I'm skeptical about certain things like social practice and institutional critique and these things that have been kind of accepted ways of I support it, but I'm not, sort of skeptical of certain of the ways that they're institutionalized, and artists have kind of narrowed down what it means to be an artist. I think we can think of ourselves as people that participate in the real world such that it is.
When you talk about social practice and you said institutional critiques,
yeah,
like what do you mean by that?
I don't want to waste our precious time. There is in the art world. Look, there are different movements that have been articulated very beautifully by art historians that try to bring a little bit of form to the chaos of cultural production and help us understand like certain types of social practices. So like an artist called Andrea Fraser, who I admire greatly, who's made it her task to help museum goers become aware of the power structure of boards and the way that art works, to greenwash, bring social and cultural capital to people that are involved in suspect business practices. It's happening very openly around the Whitney Biennial right now. There was a board member that has become wealthy from selling mace. The mace is being used at the border. It's being used against children. And the artist said they don't want to be involved. They've drawn the line. I think it's a very good use of their political intentionality, bringing their force to bear and bringing this awareness into the world. Museums are not neutral places. The art world is not a democracy. It's probably an oligarchy at best, right? But such is the complexity and the contradiction and the problem of participating in the world and in the art world. Wait, where was I?
I asked you what you meant about social practice, and you were kind of dead.
Well, there's this very, very cool kind of nascent art historical framework around people who are making work that openly employs those activist strategies in their art practice, so that's put before the object itself.
The project.
Yeah, and I think it's a very cool thing. As a painter, I'm often sort of pigeonholed as a kind of reactionary artist doing this old-fashioned thing, but I still feel like there's some good water to be squeezed, to be wrung out of the towel of painting, and I think that it can be involved in trenchant conversations and be beautiful at the same time.
And you try to channel that now with the promoting or discussing climate change, yeah?
Well, look, I think if I were to step back from my work over the last 10 to 15 years, it's been inflected by or informed by an awareness of climate change in one way or another. And how could it not be? I mean, it's affecting all of us in different ways. I don't think everyone is going to be impacted and suffer equally. It's not the way it's going to play out.
It hasn't already.
Right.
I mean, you look at India, they're having massive water shortages because their aquifers are drying up because of the use of natural water, when we still have sprinklers and fountains and other things that we frivolously use for beauty.
Right, and then also the distribution of population and the distribution of water are two radically asymmetrical
100%
kinds of things.
Yeah.
And in Los Angeles, we feel it very, very acutely.
Yep.
I mean, we could not help but feel it during the drought.
Yeah.
That's when, when you become obsessed with something, you see a little piece of it in everything. And I think around the drought in the second and third year, I was like, wait a second, something's going on here. This doesn't feel right. And the question is why? Well, the reason is that our water comes from 300, 500, and more than 1,000 miles away. And it was imported in a moment when there was a fantasy of limitless resources. And now we're up against the very real crushing realization that resources are not only limited, they're scarce. How do we deal with deglaciation, or like water, like snow going away from mountains, when 2 billion people get their potable water from glaciers on mountains? How do we reckon with that? Do mountains look different now? They do to me, but I want to paint them, and I'm wary of seeming like a kind of A, Cassandra, or B, smug know-it-all about this stuff. I'm as affected by it as everyone else is, and I'm curious about it, and I want my work to ask questions openly and hopefully to engage in conversations.
I think there's
real quick, there's a tie-in to JPL with the LA water thing.
Yeah.
I saw a video of research they're doing in Colorado, where we get a lot of water, and part of it has to do with the snow melting faster than it had in previous years, and they wondered why. And they found out that it has to do with dirt, because of four-wheelers, horses, like people doing recreational things. More dust is in the atmosphere than normal, and it settles on the snow and allows it to heat up at a higher rate or faster rate than it would normally, and then melt, and then run off to the places where it would normally go, just at a faster rate. And one of the things we don't do here in LA is collect water. For some reason, it just runs off to the ocean. So then we're not drinking it because we don't have any desalinization plants. It's a whole other thing. But
the aquifer here could support. My understanding is the aquifer here could support 250,000 people, and since the LA River was cemented over after the floods in the 30s by the Army Corps, I think you're exactly right that the aquifer is not recharging. A lot of it slips off to the ocean. But then we also have the predicament of this kind of urbanization and density of population. And we have between, I don't know, depending on how you count, between 4 and 10 million people living on an aquifer that could support 250,000. And naturally.
I ain't real strong at math, but
yeah.
I don't think that's going to cover them all.
Yeah, as Lenny Bruce said, we're all going to die.
Eventually.
Yeah. No, but go. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
But look, I think art can be a really wonderful way of engaging in an awareness of site and place and history. And, whether it's Martin Puryear helping us understand that the intense complicity and contradictions of of Brown University and that legacy, or artists that are working around water and land use in Los Angeles or whatever. I think that's the stuff that's interesting to me, and then also a lot of other stuff. But but that's sort of in terms of what is interesting to me, and then and certainly the work that I'm doing around icebergs and glaciers and water and that is right in the same kind of progression of investigation of representation, how we make the unseen visible. How do we in our cars, as Californians, on the 2 to the 134 to Colorado, to whatever, when we hear on NPR that there is an iceberg the size of Rhode Island calving in Antarctica, and it's 110 degrees in June, and I'm stuck in traffic. How do I make a relationship? How do I formulate a relationship between this site where I am and that site where that is, in a way that can lead to meaningful, productive, positive changes, either in consumption or participating in a broader conversation about awareness around this, or bringing it into scale. And I don't know the answers about this, but at JPL, for instance, they're doing lots of work using essentially military and surveillance technologies to do remote sensing, to analyze ice density, to figure out how fast sea ice interactions are happening, to predict how fast sea level is rising, to help scientists make better predictions, to help shipping, to help all the kinds of things that have to happen. I think they might take a very neutral view towards it, and I think that there's a kind of self-censorship that's happening in the federal government around information around climate change, which is very frightening and stupid. But again, don't wait for the government. Let's the three of us have a conversation about it and figure out.
Aren't we technically the government?
Idealistically,
there it is.
Yeah,
when do we hold them
and it ultimately
accountable?
comes down to what role do you see the government playing versus what role you see yourself playing, and what's your privilege to be able to affect it. Now, I have to take a pause because we are approaching time.
Yeah, how much do we have?
None.
We can go another 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I just got the approval.
You got the green light?
Good.
One of the most powerful people
In your life.
in our life.
Yeah.
The CEO of the home.
the board of
The
directors.
Supreme Czar. The Supreme.
Our babysitter.
Yeah.
Vanessa.
We were way off.
Who I am
Way
thanking
Profusely.
This is the community.
Yeah,
This
I
is
know.
it takes a village model. God forbid we should
It
invoke
does.
archaic forms of
It does.
liberal
Goodness.
fantasy. But anyway, yeah, it actually does.
Archaic forms of liberal fantasy.
So-
It takes a village.
Yeah, but it does.
It does. It actually
It really does.
And
Yeah.
I think
It's how you define
the
your
mass-
village,
the
but it
massive
still
trend
takes one.
that we have to accept is that we're going to be local, increasingly local, and deal
It's
with
happening.
the
It is
consequences.
100%.
Yeah,
And the
think-
reality is, we have this fantasy. You talk about that fantasy of individual achievement, especially in Western culture, where that whole bootstrap argument or whatever it is. No matter what we do, we need help, and accepting that we need help, but how that help manifests itself. In LA, help manifests itself very differently than, say, a rural the town where you've got grandparents and other things. We've got grandparents, you've got friends, you've got all these people who collectively put together,
you
right?
say that we bought our place in Gardena 4 years ago. We got help from our parents, not much, but it was really a struggle to be we need 10K more, or we need 40K more to help with this 20% down payment, so we're not paying PMI.
Yeah.
And at the same time, some people that we know, their parents just bought them a place, because they were able to, and that's how you continue
That's
the
how you
chain
help.
of wealth and
Yeah.
building.
And help manifests in
But
different
I was
ways.
so proud,
Yeah.
or I had to do it on my own, that it was hard to ask for the help. Probably partially because it was hard for them to give it. I know their situation, but it's interesting. Like, I'm just thinking about that as you say that.
Like, and it does take a village. Like, and it's not. I mean, if you try to do it all on your own, you're gonna find yourself like banging your head against the wall, hoping that you have another hour in the day to do something. I have to ask you a question though before Rodney asks his final question as we come up on time, because I think this one's going to take a longer answer. You said you moved to LA 15 years ago and haven't had a bad day since. Yet you expose yourself to things that otherwise tend to lead to a more cynical outlook. And even in your comments about the last 3 years and other things, like, how do you continue to maintain that optimism and positivity and have good days every day while you still inundate yourself with things that could easily make you go, what the hell, the world's falling apart?
How do I
maintain that positive, saying you haven't had a bad day in 15 years, like, that's an awesome thing.
The way that I maintain my optimism is with extreme pessimism. And a sense of, look, I think, especially as a parent, a kind of realistic reckoning of one's idealism with the world as it is. And then, look, you want to make the world better, make your list and dig in. You know, I think this is what we have to do, and I don't have any delusion of I am not doing so much. We are trying to survive, and we are trying to have fun, and we are trying to make the world a better place. I am not Mother Teresa, and I'm certainly not Che Guevara, and I'm not even close to so many friends that volunteer, really get into it, and activists, but I think digging in and taking some responsibility.
What in there? Why do you define that as extreme pessimism?
I was being cheeky.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
Just wanted to make sure.
It's going for a cheap laugh.
I really think things are going to go to shit, but I'll try to work it out, right?
No, I think just being, look, I vacillate between the poles of extreme idealism, almost gleefully naive idealism, and a very kind of, unvarnished sort of realistic sense of how things are. But look, I think there's a lot of joy and play and pleasure to be had, and a lot of good work that isn't pleasurable and playful that we can do. And I hope that somehow my artwork can participate in it on some level as well.
Do you struggle with guilt about not doing enough?
Yes. You?
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
What
I
issues?
definitely.
What issues specifically?
I think everything. I mean, for me, no, and I know what I mean by that.
All the matter in the universe.
All the things,
No,
like the Mars thing. Like I haven't built my rocket yet.
Like on a micro level, more specifically than on a macro level, like you talk about homelessness. I lived in Chicago for 10 and a half years, right? How many times I walked by someone on the street and didn't do anything, even at a macro level, to help influence a positive impact to the change of that circumstance. Or even just, some people will sit down and have a conversation and get to know somebody and make someone feel seen. Like, these are those things that I always struggle with. Like, am I really doing anything, or am I doing enough? And
and I feel like I've been given a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I've got struggles, but I feel like I've been healthy, parents that love me, siblings that are smart and love me. I've just been fortunate to get a lot, and so I feel like I owe. And it's a big, like, at times it's been a problem for me where I give more than I should.
And what are some of the concrete things that you guys are doing?
I'm on the board of directors for the Boys and Girls Club of Venice, and that came out of specifically being a black man that's done well in a corporate sense and trying to show other black and brown children that it is possible, and show them that it's possible. And I know you do some volunteering.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have volunteered at the homeless shelter in Cleveland in their computer lab, helping people apply for jobs and things like that. You know, I'm on a advisory board for the Cleveland Clinic to improve patient medical interactions within the children's hospital specifically. But at the same time, and I've done some volunteering at a school in Cleveland, which that particular volunteering, I think my efforts could have been done differently. And then we do this, right? But at the same time, for me, I think my biggest struggle is that balance of I've got 2 little ones at home and a family that depend on me to do the things that need to be done for my ecosystem, but I'm always like, I need to do more for others too, but I only have so much time, energy, and in things to give.
Resources.
And so it's like I'm investing all this energy in myself, my family, and it's like, am I doing enough for others, and do I have that time and resource? And that's where my guilt ultimately manifests when it comes to, am I doing enough? And I even think about it in terms of this podcast, like, I know where we'll go, but are we doing enough? Yeah.
What I hear in both of your good works descriptions is that it's something that I feel, which is I think that people do have what one of my favorite teachers of all time, Robert Cole, said, a call to service in us. And I think if you don't do a little bit, at least a little bit for people for no remuneration, you can't get paid for it.
Right.
Can't get action from it. It's not, your career is not going to be boosted by it. But if you don't do a little bit of something, at least, then you don't feel right in the world. And it's funny how kids suddenly take all of that and you have to pour so much energy caring for another person, and you learn so much from that. But look, I ask that question in a neutral way. It's out of curiosity, and I do truly believe, I know I could do much more, and have to dig in deeper and kind of feel in a funny way excited about it. But I've kind of over the years figured out different types of contortions, like tithing profits from paintings to give to people that can actually do the hard work. So for instance, a project that I did around alpine deglaciation, or basically the glaciers all disappearing, I gave a percentage of profits to an organization called Earth Justice, who are actual lawyers who actually litigate, and they spend $60 million a year doing actual great work. And I actually felt very relieved about that. In terms of finding good organizations to support, like the Boys and Girls Club of Los Angeles. A guy like Lou Danzler, who founded the South Los Angeles one, is a great hero. I'm an ant compared to him. But people that can actually...
But are you?
Yes. but
I mean, maybe just his call was different.
Yeah, maybe so.
Right? And maybe his resources at the time were different.
Yeah.
Than, taking profits from painting and giving them to an organization with lawyers. Somebody we talked to recently said something about wanting to attain power so they can affect good. And power can mean a lot of things: money, influence, legal standing. There's a lot of different ways to affect.
I'm really glad you said that. I'm really because I was thinking about it before you guys got here, but I think there's a kind of malignant power, and I think in the case of Donald Trump, and I think a kind of fantasy power that he projects. I think it's a kind of power that, quoting a really, really smart guy, is a kind of power that we should not be enamored of. And his position was one should never be enamored of power. One should only ever be critiquing power and authority, to be unpacking it, to be teasing it out, and to be figuring out how individuals and societies and cultures can be more productively powerful.
To a large degree, I would agree with that. I think that there's the whole, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely saying, and you look at it, name the organization where it gets too big, or the individual gets put on a pedestal too high, and they get into whatever practice, sexual abuse, this, that, and the other. We don't deal well with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's ultimately the power.
The human ego wants it, but it doesn't deal with it well. And I think if a organization is built right, and actually this is something to talk to you about later, if it's built with the idea in mind of like, hey, we're going to be inclusive, we hold these ideals, and we're going to build a way to keep them, because from an organism level, from a structural level, you can build in the right things that keep the wrong things out. From an individual level, it's really hard. And that's where you need other people, accountability. That's why...
I mean, there's ultimately the power over and the power to, right? Like the power over others, or the power to influence, right?
Right. There's that.
It's how you channel it, whatever that ultimately manifests. And is there a natural transition that if you have the power to, you'll eventually have the power over, and then you're ultimately corrupted?
Yeah. Right, and there's that great Barbara Kruger T-shirt slogan from the 80s that we thought we dealt with, which was, abuse of power comes as no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And, here we are.
It's a human condition.
But if we're to think back in Boston as a kid and seeing, a kid screaming the N-word at a bus going through Southie on the way, a Medico bus going out to the suburbs, screaming at another kid, and then being horrified in my jammies watching the morning news feed.
Yeah.
It wasn't a feed, it was like morning news, Channel 4. I didn't understand what power I had. I didn't understand it. And this is one of the things that I think is a great reckoning of it right now. And I think this notion of being woke and the notion of teasing out power, who has it, who doesn't have it, and a kind of compassion for those that don't have it is a very important and very painful kind of learning that we all have to do right now.
And that thing you said,
how to be an ally, and how to not presume like that someone can just do anything.
Yeah.
I mean, again, around what can a person that lives under the 710 do with their asthmatic child if they don't have anywhere to go?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, and let's get tangible about it.
Well, and that thing you said about questioning power, breaking it down, that goes back to the comment about, aren't we the government? Like, in a democracy, how do we question those that we put in power, and how do we hold them accountable for why we put them in power?
The world needs a good lawyer. That's Earth Justice. Go to earthjustice.com and get involved. Give them money. They're doing good stuff.
So thank you for joining us. This has been... It's been fun. It's been enlightening.
Yeah.
There's been moments in the conversation where I'm like, I don't know if I'm keeping up, but
I hope not.
Nah, but it's been good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for making time. It's fun.
This
is a long time in the works, right?
Yeah, it has been. I mean, we first scheduled in September of last year.
Good things are worth it. We always finish with asking what you would leave our audience with. Now your audience. What would you like to drop on their eardrums?
One thing.
How do we make the world a better place?